Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Aya Om podcast. Today, I'm speaking about the breath, how to integrate breath work, how to work with the breath for all of your favorite activities, such as sex, athletics, day-to-day work and challenges, and moving through emotions. So, as a clinical breath worker, a medical Qigong teacher, a teacher of traditional Chinese medicine and yoga, among other meditation systems such as the light body system, breath is essential. It's central to everything everyone does, and it's a big part of my life. So in this episode, I'm going to talk you a little bit through how I work with the breath, because what other perspective can I offer but my own subjective experience and how I've worked with the breath over the years and how it's benefited my life. And in that process, I'll guide you through some of the practices or techniques with some detail. Obviously, we're not going to be doing breath work together on this podcast, but we'll go through a number of different things so you get an idea of how I work with the breath and, of course, why I work with the breath. So just as the most broadest way to start, let's talk about the importance of breathing. And of course, I've said these things many times on this podcast if you've been listening, and I could talk about these things for many hours. Let's just touch on the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual benefits of the breath. At the level of the physical, the breath is essential. It's the most essential nutrient you have to keep you sustained and alive. The life-giving oxygen is what energizes the cells. It brings a vital force. The incoming and outgoing breath is a central oscillator in your system that is like a central clock that coordinates all the other processes of your body, such as your nervous system and its tone, and all other systems are regulated in some way directly or indirectly through the rhythm, the rate, and the quality of your breathing. The breath is bringing in energy with every inhale, sustaining the energy and life force in your body, and with every exhale, it is the primary way your body lets go, detoxifies at the level of the cell. This is mental, emotional, and physical, but we are focusing on the physical today, or for right now. As well, the movements of the breath, the expansions and contractions, form a wave-like motion through the body, which massages and brings energy flow, circulation, as well as moving the lymphatic flow. So the immune system is all benefited through the circulation, the massaging, and the expansion, contractive movements of this breathing process. Now, when we're in a good state of health, the body is oxygenated. It will have a good pH balance. It is regulated near homeostasis, the balance, the delicate balance that the body likes, and this will help out all other processes. If your body moves too deeply into an acidic state, it's very characteristic for disease to occur there. So the breath is a buffer for the acidity in the body, in that carbon dioxide is acidic and the oxygen that comes in is alkalizing. So with your breathing rate, breathing quality, etc., your body is always subconsciously or consciously moving towards balance and trying to maintain it through your breathing rate. Now, this expansion and contraction I was telling you about when we do our proper breathing, when the belly expands out, the chest opens up, this is also creating space, circulation, and movement, which is helping to stimulate your glandular system. So you have 7 major endocrine glands as well as many other glands in the system. Part of the coordination and the stimulation and the regulation of those glandular centers is through your breathing rate. So there's so much more on this, such as your circulation, your heart rate, everything is influenced by the breath. Emotionally, your breath runs concurrently with your emotional system, meaning that for each and every moment you're having, emotion that you're having, in each moment, it has a corresponding flow and breath rhythm. If there's a sadness in the system or a fear in the system or anger in the system, these will all be followed with a corresponding breathing pattern. Now, with any emotion, it's a temporary state that moves through in a period of time, if it's fully experienced and expressed. If it's not, it's suppressed or repressed, it'll be held in the system. This is obviously more common for negative emotions. So the breath is a great facilitator of moving through emotions, regulating emotional states, suppressing emotions when it's needed, given the context or environment, and clearing out repressed emotions or unprocessed emotion stored in the system. At the level of the mental, you'll find this. You'll find this if you practice breath work. Your mind is very much related to where your breath is or how you're breathing. Not just the quality of your mind, but you can direct your mind. This means the mental chatter as well as the focus, the attentional systems are also guided by how you're breathing, where you're breathing, your consciousness of your breathing. So if you want a high level of mastery of your body, your nervous system, your emotional system, and your mind, the breath is an excellent tool. There's really nothing in this world that you can do which some breath awareness and breathing practices won't benefit. That's why it's the greatest thing in the world to market, because there's literally some practical application for it on every level. Breath is also a spiritual phenomenon. The word breath comes from the word spirit, even the word soul, because it is in a certain sense just that. Metaphorically or literally, it is the spirit that we all share. It is our connection with the Great Spirit. It's the one breath that we all breathe. The experience of doing breath work or meditation often leads to spiritual experiences, which can be discussed or explored as a unity experience beyond the personal mind and body, an overview experience that usually offers more meaning or insight into the true nature of reality or the greater context of our life and how we live. So this is a vast science, and it's a vast piece of medicine, breath medicine, I sometimes call it. A wider holistic medicine that takes the view of us mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, not just an individual, but part of a larger collective. This is all encapsulated in the breath medicine. But that's just the foreshadowing of what we're going to get into. We're going to move into breath and its practical application for many of the things that you will do in your day-to-day. Let's begin with athletics. So once again, I said that I would kind of talk about my personal experience. So I'll just run through my day, or a typical day, because I don't really have typical days, but let's start from there. So I usually do cycles of certain meditations and practices, which I'll sustain for a season, for a period like 40 days, 100 days, etc. And then I'll pick a new practice or a new cycling method. I have designated practices in the morning and the night, approximately 1 to 2 hours at each of those stations, and then often a afternoon practice, if not 5 or 6. Sometimes I get less time in the mornings or nights, and I make it up in the day, etc., etc. I'm highly variable in my days. So those morning practices, I usually wake up, I will boil some water, and then I'll drink warm water. And then I'll be seated and I'll do pranayama into meditation. I will generally go for a short run outside and get some sunlight, or it's usually dark at this time of the year, but get a little outside exposure, and I'll come back in, usually go back into breath work, and then depending on how much time I have, I'll do a full asana or practice, maybe a workout, and then I'll finish with meditation and stillness. So I've fully connected with my breath in the morning. I've ran it through my whole spinal cord. I've opened up my breathing, making sure there's no holdings. I've cleared out any mental chatter and emotional things that might have arisen in the night. And then my mind is stable, because how I breathe and my control of my breath is control of my mind, emotion, and body. So I'm taking charge of my day at the very beginning. Very beginning is very important because it's, the beginning, and you want to sustain this for the whole day. But in terms of subconscious deconditioning and conditioning, we want to be able to take control. Otherwise, we're more likely to move into old patterns of being, relating, and operating in the world. If one wants to operate at a high level of consciousness and make good decisions that are in alignment with their dream, it takes a conscious focusing of the attention and energy, and breath work and a stabilization of the mind and body is essential to this at the most optimal or highest level. So if I'm going to do my workout session, which is usually in the afternoon or evening, so this will be at the gym perhaps, maybe in nature, maybe it's a more yang style of yoga, that could be in class. I have a gym in my building I can go to. It's a number of different places. One, I'm going to want to amplify the energy in my nervous system or stimulate it towards sympathetic dominance. So the nervous system has the two branches, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic refers to yang energy, action, energy using. It helps to stimulate skeletal muscles, increase heart rate, etc. It prepares the body for action. We don't want to be in this chronically because that'll take too much of our energy. We don't want to be in it as a product of stressors, such as stressors about money and other things, which can stimulate cortisol in the system and cause us to be in this more fight or flight state. What is ideal, it is a dynamic flexibility to move between a state of regulation or balanced nervous system and then into sympathetic dominance for a localized conscious period where we're doing a athletic endeavor or whenever we want to use the energy, and then shifting back into parasympathetic or into regulation. So I don't take any caffeine. I don't use any stimulants. I rely on my breath and my conscious control of my nervous system to get all the energy that I need. Do I never use caffeine? I wouldn't say never. There's some in some chocolates, of course, and I will have an occasional tea. But right now I'm in dieta, so I'm not using those things really. So right now, not so much. Generally, I'm not saying I'm against them. I'm just choosing to regulate my energy in this way because I found it's a more stable way of working with my energy system. I get less crashes, and I can often overdo my system if I put a little caffeine in it, and then I use the breathing practices because the breathing practices are really powerful. And then I do find that if I have caffeine, it's a stimulant in the system that doesn't just leave the system. It's in there for, if it's like coffee, caffeine, I think there's like a 12-hour half-life. So if I'm taking it, late in the afternoon, that's still in my system late in the evening. And caffeine can stimulate us into like a beta brainwave rate, quite a high brainwave rate, which for me pulls me into my senses and out of a calm, centered state and more into a buzzing state, which can be really conducive for a lot of mental work, studying, and other work for a period. But it does have attacks. Like caffeine is not energy. It uses our energy supplies, and that can be pulling out. In the Chinese system, we say it pulls out the jing qi from the kidneys. And there's a reserve there, and of course we can pull out quite a bit, but when we get to 40 and 50, we might no longer have a reserve, and that's when many people end up having issues with their health because they don't have this extra reserve of qi, and they've used a lot of their body's energy, so it has to compensate for a while, and their body's really good at compensating, but eventually we run out of that energy. And then because of the work that I do, a lot of it being energy work and meditation, I can't be in a meditative state with a stimulant in me because it's amping my nervous system up too much. If I was just a worker bee on a computer all day and needing a high focus of intent activation, maybe caffeine would be a little bit more appropriate, but I'm wanting to shift into meditation for much of my day. So if I have a stimulant in my system, I can't actively move between deep states of relaxation and rest in my day because there's a stimulant acting in my system. Now, I would say this is the same for most individuals or all individuals, because if you're going to do a, say, workout and you're doing it in certain sets, you want to have maximum output during your set, and then you want to move into a phase of recovery where your body can rest. whether it's active rests, passive rests, or whatever you're doing in between your sets or main activation periods. So that is your nervous system basically shifting into sympathetic dominance and needing to come back into regulation or into parasympathetic so it can recover its creatine supplies as well as other clear out lactic acid, etc. So this, we want to be as effective as possible. Once again, if there's a stimulant in the system, it'll be less able to come into that recovery. So individuals who are consistently using caffeine, they'll use more energy with less recovery during their workouts, and this just creates less efficiency in the system, especially long term. So before a workout, I don't take caffeine. I will stimulate my body with my breathing, and typically I will do some like Wim Hof breathing, where it's deep, rhythmic, and connected. Deep, rhythmic, and connected. And I assure that I'm breathing into my full body, meaning that my diaphragm, my pelvic floor, my diaphragm in the thoracic cavity, and my throat is all working alive. Nothing's caught in there, nothing's contracted or held, so that I'm getting energy flow through all my major spinal centers. Meaning that if I'm not getting expansions and contractions in my lower belly, it means a lot of the energy of the breath and that massaging movement is not helping to stimulate the glandular centers as well as to bring the breath down there. The breath, in its most efficient and effective way of breathing, that sounded kind of funny, but the ideal way to breathe is having a container for the breath, meaning we have some engagement of the pelvic floor and some engagement of the inner core unit, etc., which forms a pressure cavity. So that when we breathe down into the low belly, it forms a pressure cavity so that when we exhale, pull the belly in towards the spine and compress the lower centers, it's able to most effectively clear out all of the breath from the lungs. Many people breathe and there's still a small amount of oxygen left in the lungs. So we're not taking full breaths because we're not breathing to our full capacity. To breathe to the full capacity, it takes a large coordination of all the muscles, and it takes some time to build up, just like you warm up before you do exercise. There's a little bit of warming up of the breathing system, the breathing apparatus, in order for us to take our fullest, deepest breaths. So in the beginning, I'll do very intentional breathing work to expand my lung capacity, to breathe into my whole body, which is going to bring my nervous system into the sympathetic dominance as well as bring in energy. And it's going to bring in good, clean energy. It's not energy that comes from food, which has to be digested, and there's a lot more byproduct that takes time through the metabolism process. There's metabolism, of course, going on with oxygen and the exchange into carbon dioxide, but it's a much cleaner form of energy. One of the ways that I trained in order to make my body more efficient is doing a lot of yoga and other practices completely fasted. So you wouldn't want to do this with body weight training or weightlifting, etc. But when you learn to work in a fasted state, I guess you could do some of it if you're replenishing after, but if you're working in a fasted state, you learn to be very effective and efficient with how you move your body because you don't have a surplus of calories. And you also have better mind-body awareness and control of your breath in a more like, I would say like my movements become more graceful when I'm in that fasted state. There's more precision and refinement in my movement capacity, the less heavy or dense foods I have. So in training in those states, I don't know all the biochemistry. I'm more of someone who's deeper in their practices, and I learn a fair amount of the science behind it. But I could tell you or kind of assume that there's some physiological changes that are happening when we're working more with the breath in those fasted states. Maybe these are like amping up the amount of mitochondria in the cell or their efficiency, etc. So we're just working at a different level of our system. Because if you think about working out in athletics, many people are very focused on their musculoskeletal system and how their primary muscles, usually the larger ones that are showing off, like our biceps and the more obvious ones that make us look good. They focus really on those and having big muscles, but strength and finesse and the efficiency of our system has so many other factors. It's the nervous system that's getting a lot of these adaptations for strength, and it's the mind-body connection of how the nervous system, the nerves, actually innervate the musculoskeletal, the actual contact points where the nerves are actually making their connections, so that when you contract the muscle, you're fully contracting it. It's a mind-body connection that has to be developed. So there's many different aspects of training, and the breath is an excellent way to enhance training and bring in a whole new domain of it. Just on that note, there's like the inner art systems of Qigong, and there's a lot of martial arts in Qigong, and then of course Tai Chi, and that's a martial art in its own, yoga asana, etc. These traditional arts, they're often like training the nervous system, is a way to say it. And it's not so much that you need like a lot of protein to do these things, which is very different than the way that I grew up in thinking about weightlifting and training, or even carbohydrate and anything. Because for these internal arts, you can train fasted and grow, because you're growing the energy body, you're growing the nervous system. And it's true that most people who haven't worked out, who start working out, will experience a lot of training gains and strength, and even their look of how their body looks. Because those first 4 to 6 weeks is your nervous system, that's mind-body connection that I'm speaking to, beginning to adapt. And it's not even that your muscles are becoming bigger, but your connection to them and the capacity for them to increase in their tone and have an innervation with a little contractive force to them is developing. And you can continue to work with the nervous system if you train in a very specific way. And that's why in yoga, it's more about training at like a level of 70, maybe 80% of your maximum. And this is the harmony, the yin and yang, of not overdoing it, so that you can actually train for 12 plus hours a day and get a higher volume in there. And the training adaptations come when you do a movement patterning, and that's a neural code that's being developed and strengthened in your nervous system. And then you come into rest at the end of practice, which is Shavasana. And that's like a cycle. And you can do that cycle many times a day, whereas most people do an active period of movement throughout their whole day and they rest at night. So those individuals get a max 365 training cycles like that, where they're moving in between neural patterning and then rest, which integrates it. Whereas if you're practicing in short periods or doing a number of different practices a day, you can increase your growth cycles multiple times over in each day, so your volume of training can increase, and you're doing it in a very efficient way, because the nervous system and the breath system has less byproduct, whereas many of the other processes of gaining muscle and eating lots of food, etc., creates a lot more metabolic waste, which once again, it's just like a less efficient way of running the system. So there's something to say there's a harmony of how much food to take in. It's like a real precision. So training for me looks like some strength training, of course. Some muscle is needed, but because of my intentions, it's all about like what we're focusing on and why. My intention is not to be really strong, not to be even really that athletic. Like I do a fair amount of martial arts and other sports and running and biking, but I'm not trying to compete at the highest levels in these. So I don't focus all my energy there, though I have a capacity to do all those things. My focus is actually meditation and samadhi, and this path of, I guess meditation's a decent word. Like, the practices are preparatory for the inner work of learning to reach greater and greater meditative states and blissful states, samadhi states, and muscle's not needed, because at a certain point of the practice, there's a surrendering of the body and mind and moving into these more expanded states. And that, for me, is where I focus my meditations and attention. So although it works that I do in gyms and other things, of course I enjoy it, and I enjoy the sports, and I enjoy living a good life, and a healthy body is essential to living that life and offering in a really beautiful way, having sustained energy, as well as it's important to create good body alchemy. And a healthy body is needed. So I keep in check how much actual exercise, activity, and muscle I actually need, and how much is just my ego or wanting to, fit in and look good for women and being in culture. So I do my best with that work, and because of that, me training in a gym looks a lot different than most people training in the gym, because I will frequently move into breath work or meditation, and I usually keep it pretty damp. I'm not doing anything too crazy. I'm not popping out Kundalini and doing mantra in the middle of a gym if I go to a gym. But I am doing that on my own. And that for me works really well. So I will go through like doing an exercise set, moving into yoga asana because the body's all open, and then moving into meditation, and then, doing my rest period. So that might take a minute or 2 minutes to do that whole cycle, and then resting in meditation, and then do another cycle. Just as an individual would lift some weights, and then they would rest, maybe go on their phone, maybe talk, maybe just sit there. I'm actively using that space to stretch out my body, to mobilize, and to move into meditation. So every second of that workout is something's being done. I'm working at all the levels of my nervous system, from most stimulated, active, to regulated, to completely rested, and then I'm recycling through. And that has a compounding effect on my capacity to regulate my nervous system. That is, to enter stressful states, stimulated states, come back into balance, and then stay in rest. So breathing throughout the practice is very important. If I'm lifting heavy weights, how do I breathe? I keep a level of toning in my pelvic floor. So this includes my perineum. This includes a little pulling in of my sex organ and a closing up of my anus. That forms a firm floor for the breath to build that pressure system in the lower centers. And then there's a little pulling in of the low belly and toning of the abdomen, or the transversus abdominis. Once again, this forms like a corset that is my abdomen. As I breathe in, before I lift weight or do a big pushing movement, I keep my navel slightly pulled in. So rather than fully expanding the belly out into softness, there's a tone kept in the lower belly. And then as I breathe out, I open the mouth, breathe into the nose, I open the mouth on the exhale, and I push the breath out as I pull the navel in. Once again, repeating that, I'll come back in, recoil, inhale, keeping tone in the pelvic floor and abdomen, keeping it slightly pulled in, so not fully expanding out. And then exhaling, pulling the navel back towards the spine, releasing the breath through the mouth. So through the nose is more effective to breathe in. It's the proper way, quote unquote, proper way to breathe in most of the time, unless I'm doing extreme exertion. We'll get into that in a moment. The toning of the pelvic floor and everything, once again, increases the pressure. It stabilizes because it's working with the inner core unit, or the stabilizer muscles, which are the foundation for the arms and the legs. It needs a good foundation with core unit. And it stabilizes the spine, so there's no back pain or impingement of the spinal cord. And then it keeps everything moving in a good way, so to speak. Now, I mentioned breathing in through the nose, breathing out through the mouth is really good. Breathing out through the mouth always is good for maximum exertion and letting go. So this might be when running full bore. Not always when running. I'll usually breathe through my nose if I can. If I need to breathe through my mouth, I'll breathe in for a period that is necessary and then move back to nose breathing. Nose breathing is much more efficient. It warms the air, creates nitric oxide, which opens up the blood vessels as well as the bronchioles, etc. So we want to work dynamically with the breath. Each moment, there's something we can do to regulate our system more effectively. It's not a prescription. There's always wiggle room for us to do different breathing patterns as we're exercising, as we're competing, martial arts, etc. So we want to have a very good and intelligent relationship with the breathing. Other times that I would use mouth breathing, like in and out through the mouth, besides running really fast, would be sex, maximum exertion and releasing emotions, singing. That's all I can think of right now, but these are all periods that you'd be breathing deeper, faster, because you're going to be releasing emotions and stress, and you really want to amp the system up. If you breathe chronically through the mouth, you'll amp the system up too much and it becomes inefficient over time. And of course, breathwork practices such as breath wave and conscious connected breathing. After a period of amping up the breathing system, you'll have a lot more control over the breath. And then after you've been working out, you've been doing your weight sets, your cardiovascular. Actually, I'll touch on cardiovascular, then we'll get to integration after. If you're doing cardiovascular activity, I kind of mentioned this, breathe in and out through the nose. It'll be harder at first, but you're going to retrain your system. It's like wearing weights on your body. It's harder to train, but you're going to make your system more effective so that when you do breathe in and out through the mouth, you'll have a lot more energy. Once again, maximum exertion in and out of the mouth. And then it's very dynamic whether you're controlling the breathing as opposed to passively breathing. Control of the breathing means that there's some level of conscious exertion of the muscular system to contract the muscles to make a different passageway of air so that you're regulating the flow of breath. Now, control can be very good, but it's also energy using. It takes a lot of attention. And if you're doing something like competing in a sport, you probably don't have the attentional resources to control your breathing. So some control of the breath, say if you're doing some basic running and not competing, can be nice. And then I usually let my breathing go. So once I've warmed up my system and I'm keeping a level of contraction or tonality in my abdomen, etc., I've created good opening. It's like warming up the breath. Once it's all warmed up, the breath can breathe itself. And I'll just touch it every once in a while. Maybe I'm about to run a little faster. Maybe I'll breathe a little deeper for a few conscious breaths. Or maybe I notice my body is building up with acidity through the lactic acid that gets built up when we work out. So with that, I can breathe out more to help neutralize or buffer my blood so that it becomes more alkali, so I don't put myself into too much anaerobic activity, and I can bring a little bit more aerobic activity so that my body once again works efficiently. So this deep listening is very important. This deep listening as to how the body is doing. How do I know my body is acidic? Well, you can often feel it because the acidic nature of the acidity I can feel it. I don't know how to describe that. But it will change the breathing because when we're acidic, when we breathe in, if we were to hold the breath, that acidity triggers certain neurons in the brainstem, which indicate high carbon dioxide, because that's going to be seen concurrently with an acidic body, is that you'll have the urge to breathe in. If you can breathe in, hold your breath comfortably, your body is not very acidic. So to the degree you are acidic, if you breathe in and your body's like, it wants to breathe out right away, well, it needs to breathe off some carbon dioxide to bring in a more regulated or neutral state. So as you're exercising, if it's really hard to just comfortably breathe out and breathe in and hold the breath, etc., then you know that it might be time for you to do a carbon dioxide offload. Do some big sighs, some longer exhales, really pull the navel in. This is why the breathing is such a developed system, and it's important to work with it, because it's like any other thing in your body. You have to train it. This is your neck. This is your tongue. This is your wrists. You can't just do push-ups and expect your whole body to develop like your legs. You need to train every part of your system if you want to make it work well. Your breathing apparatus, all the muscles, accessory muscles that work with the breathing are very important to train. So our capacity to breathe in fully, as I was mentioning before, to actually breathe out fully, breathe in fully, takes a lot of work with the diaphragms, with the abdominal muscles. So this is something that has to be trained on its own and then in conjunction with other activities, so it's a more functional pattern. And the more functional and effective it is, you'll be able to breathe out, which will mean to neutralize the carbon dioxide. And this also has the releasing effect emotionally and mentally too, which is also really important for athletics. And then in the integration of your athletic period, you want to have a regulated breath or a breath witnessing practice. Regulated meaning there's balance between inhale and exhale, or moving parasympathetic longer exhales than inhales, or simply breath witnessing, which is like once you've done some work, you can let go and relax. And that means no controlling of the breath, just witnessing it. And that's really important at the end of practice, which will allow the control, the contraction, the sympathetic tone of your muscles to begin to relax. Because if you keep a tonality, like that contraction in your muscles, that's a sympathetic signal being sent to them that's saying, use energy, and your body won't as effectively shift into parasympathetic. So that's a little bit about breathing and exercising. Let's touch into sex. So once again, we will want to make sure that we're breathing into our full body, and especially breathing in and feeling. So I didn't touch on this in the athletic section, but when you breathe into your body, you have an increased capacity to feel, because you're activating the nervous system where you're breathing into. So we're not looking to activate the body for activation to do a very athletic endeavor. We're looking to, yes, stimulate the body, but we're looking to arouse the senses, arouse the sensitivities. Because the breath gives us a tool to activate the many different parts of our nervous system, our potential. So there's different systems involved when we do athletics, whereas when we make love. Because our nervous system has all these very subtle sensory fibers in the skin at multiple levels that detect things like gentle touch, firm touch, different types of tickling. Those are all sensed by different receptors. So we want to increase subtle sensitivity. So we don't just want a very long or deep full breath. That may be for a period, but we also want to increase this mind-body awareness, the sensation of breathing into your hands, breathing into your genitals, breathing into the body, so that the consciousness that comes with the breath is moving into your system. So this is really important. Once again, we're always going to want to practice good breathing principles with a pelvic floor engagement. This is not only essential for your breathing, the strengthening of your pelvic floor muscles to hold your organs, but also for your sexual activities, your capacity to withhold ejaculation for men, and strengthen like your Kegel muscles to maintain the pumps that are in your body. Because a lot of what we do in sex is to move sexual fluids, not just from your sex organs, but like endocrine secretions from other glandular centers in your body. And this works on blood and circulation and pumps. This is thrusting, is a pumping motion, as well as integrating squeezing of the anus, squeezing of the lower centers, which helps to, once again, pump things through the system. If we're going to get into a little bit of Taoism and tantric practices, we have cerebral spinal fluid in the spinal cord, as well as in the various ventricles or spaces in the brain, as well as surrounding the whole brain. Cerebral spinal fluid is one of the things that we pump when we hump. So when you're pumping and humping and squeezing the lower centers, you can bring some of the energy of the sexual arousal into the cerebral spinal fluid, which can then be pumped up through the spinal cord. This takes specific practices to do this effectively. But when those lower energies move up the spinal system, and then the brain becomes basked in them, then it's going to flood your brain with all the beautiful, pleasurable chemicals into the higher centers of your brain, activating different brain areas, which can bring about all kinds of more blissful states than ordinarily if you're just working with the genital organ and it's localized at that level of your nervous system. You can bring sexual energy through your whole nervous system and through your whole body, amounting to a full body orgasm rather than just a local genital orgasm. And this is all based on your breathing, your capacity to move energy through the system, and the pumps, the contraction and relaxation and the pressurization of different body cavities. So like your abdominal cavity, your thoracic cavity, etc. So it's kind of hard to explain all the practices in this. If you want more information, I can provide that, but this will just be like a general overview. But there's ways that I would massage my whole body. I would usually do a preparatory practice before I make love, before I even meet my partner, so that I'm ready to go, and then additional preparatory practices with the partner and myself. So what I might do for myself to prepare, and this is of course biased towards a man, I would do channel dredging, which is a Qigong full body massage, which I basically bring my breath and my hands over my entire body so that I'm dredging, cleansing out my meridian lines, as well as bringing circulation, touch, and awareness to my whole body from head to toe. I might move into some shaking to release any tensions from my system, because I want to be able to experience the flow of energy through my nervous system. So if I have any blockages, excessive contractions, which could be stress, which could be overworking out, which could be many different things that block off the actual energy moving through the nervous system, the qi, then I won't be able to effectively feel the full body orgasm and all the pleasure and stimulation that comes, because a lot of making love is receiving. It's not action output. So there's a lot of softening that happens, especially in the internal arts ways of making love. It's not like the aggressive macho man just plowing through somebody that you might see in your porn videos. That might take a particular period, but there's a lot more receiving and touch and working with the many different subtleties of how we can stimulate our nervous system and really open up the senses in a more developed way. So full body touch, a little bit of shaking. As a male, preparatory practices of the genital organ, such as pulling of the energy, breathing into the organ, some longer twists, holds, so twisting of the organ in various ways, which will help to stretch the fascia, releasing any holdings in the system. And then also drawing the breath down into the fascial networks and just opening up the nervous systems with those longer holds. Some shaking out of the actual organ, some tapping to help, once again, to stimulate the glands down there, the testicles and the prostate gland, etc., warming up the prostate gland with some circular spirals, counterclockwise and clockwise directions, as well as counterclockwise and clockwise circle spiraling around the anus, the coccygeal body, which lies at the bottom of the tailbone should be stimulated and aroused, so that all these channels, their connections, everything's open and ready. I will typically eat quite light or fast. Like if I know I'm making love, I will prepare 24 hours at least in advance for this, as I will if I do any other ceremony or anything. There's just the more you put in, the more you offer, the better it is. So preparatory fasting or eating light. I don't like to always be completely fasted. Sometimes I'll have like some nuts, maybe just like a tiny little bit of fish before, some oil, just things that'll give me enough energy so that I have energy, and then enough raw materials for my testosterone and other things there. Full body massage. Sometimes I'll release my tongue, so do some tongue yoga and lip yoga. And often, once I've stabilized my body, like I do yoga asana every day, get a general like centering effect. Often like dance is a little bit more conducive to me for lovemaking, because it's a very intuitive art, both lovemaking and dance. And if there's too much structure in my body, such as doing too much linear movement and stable positioning in yoga, I lose that intuitive sensitivity. So dance helps me to open up in a very creative, flowing way. So I'm balancing that kind of Shiva and Shakti energy within myself. Other preparatory practices, I will often do mantra or other song, prayer, meditation, because the vibration of me singing is a practice. It's not just me projecting my voice outwards. It's me vibrating my body as I sing, so that once again, it's like the vibration of my voice clears up stagnation, and it opens up areas of the body because it vibrates them. It's going to open up circulation, and it's going to jiggle the cells so that the prana and the energy can go there. And then it's also going to imbue my field, my mental fields, my emotional fields, with that quality of intention. So I'm not walking in there watching a bunch of, Simpsons, and that's in my mental field, and the news or whatever it is. That stuff that we watch stays in our mental fields, in our subconscious, because it has to be processed at multiple different levels. So having a period of 24 hours or more where you are really intentional about the environments and the things that you're exposed to will enhance your capacity to create a beautiful field of energy around you. And all this work is your prayer, it's your offering to your partner, which is in a sense part of the foreplay. It's part of the give and receive, because the more love and attention that you can offer you and your practices, it's filling your cup, it's filling your love, and so that you have enough to offer. And when you practice inner energetic practices like breathing and Taoist lovemaking, I lost my train of thought there. You can reach a point of self-satisfaction where you can not so much be in desire. And I know this whole talk isn't on Taoism and lovemaking, which I'll do another one on. But I had a talk on this on a podcast I just did with somebody else, like an interview. And that a lot of people don't know or realize that a lot of the sexual tantra stuff is really good. Like if we're doing the massaging and we're not ejaculating, and that's important. But during lovemaking, this is really key. You're not supposed to be in a really desirous state or a desirous state at all. And that's one of the hardest things to decondition out of the system. But you can practice that on your own. And that's how you sexually arouse yourself without moving into desire. Which for most men, I know a fair amount of women I've talked to about this, they don't do this. But it means you can't think about anybody else when you're making love. I guess you could if you're just focusing on your love for them, but you usually wouldn't want to use an object of your meditation for desire. You wouldn't want to look at an image or sexually stimulate yourself with desire, which is the ordinary pathway that has been conditioned for many, many years, probably for most people. I can speak for myself. So there's a deconditioning of that desire-related sensual gratification, that if it's sublimated, I don't know if that's the right word, but changed in a way, we can actually focus more of our love, and we can still receive pleasure, but it doesn't have desire entwined with it, which changes the whole quality of it. So preparatory practices of self-stimulation massaging can be done without desire, and it's a really hard art. It's very difficult, and that's why the real teachings of Tantra and getting deeper into it as a spiritual process and path is not what is typically taught on YouTube, because it's more selling. You can sell easier to just be like multiple orgasms, and everybody wants that because it triggers the deeper longings of their desire. So many of the other teachings are not to move deeply into that, because then you're learning to use your energetic system more powerfully. So it's a more powerful way to imprint your subconscious mind. And then if you're still using desire, you can just be imprinting deeper desires into your system. So once again, this is kind of explaining things through a certain way of seeing them, which is not the only way. But if you do want to transcend those desires, and now you've just imprinted them at a deeper level with a more powerful practice, they might actually be harder to let go of, because you've made sex that much better in a desirous way, and your body's going to learn how good it is. It's like, for some drugs, they're so good, they feel so good that the body wants them again. If you had shitty drugs, you wouldn't desire them as much because they're shitty drugs. But if you have really pleasurable, good drugs, they're a lot harder to quit. Same thing, if your sex is so good, but so desirous, you might even be able to think of a partner you've had. The sex was so good, but you knew you didn't want to be with them. So you're really going after the sex, and you're really imprinting that, and the body's learning all these things about attachment, and it's creating a relationship with that pleasure, which is through desire, and that can be harder to work with in the future. So it's a little side note. So that's some of the preparatory practices, and this video is getting quite long, so I'll just finish up with some of the things that one might do during sex. And that would be synchronizing the breath with your partner. That's really key, because it'll synchronize the energy fields, your energy, and then the field of energy that's shared between two people. As well as when one partner breathes out, the other breathes in, and you cycle breath through your body. This may be done just with your partner connected to you, sitting on top of one another, or if you're inserted in one another, one individual can breathe down through their spinal cord and out through their genital organ, where the other person contracts their genital organ, draws that breath in up the spinal cord through the sacral hiatus, that small opening in the bottom of the spinal cord, draws it up, and then brings it up to their head, and then that other individual, or lips it could be, and then that other individual breathes in that breath and then breathes it down, and they continue to cycle that energy. Now this practice is a lot more effective when all the pumps of the body and the breathing system has been developed, as well as the containers of the body. So that abdominal work, the pelvic floor work, and moving the cerebral spinal fluid, maybe some cat-cow movements, etc. When you're moving into maximum exertion, if you're going towards a peak during your session, breathing in and out of the mouth and making sound is really key, because that'll bring through a lot more energy, activate the system. If you're going to use sound, because this is still the breath, your tone of sound is really important, because tones relate to different aspects of your spinal cord. Lower tones for lower spine, middle tones, middle spine, upper tones, higher spine. So if you're moaning, it's like a grunt, that's lower tone, that's more animalistic, that's lower centers. If it's more in the heart, we're looking to activate that's like the vibration of that sound is rooted in the middle centers. And if you're in the higher levels, that'll be much more in the higher centers. So there's a playing or working with how you express your pleasure. And if you're using your full vocal range, you'll also be connecting vibrationally with the whole spinal cord, which once again will set the stage for your whole spinal system and the sensitivities of your nervous system to more effectively give and receive pleasure. And then, of course, there's a cadence to how we do meditation, how we do lovemaking. And when you've gone in through a peak, you want to also be able to, one, just like you're working out, come into regulation or into deep rest and rejuvenation. So you might want to come through a period of deep breathing in and out of the mouth and moaning, and then slow it right down. Slow it down into regulation and even stillness. Stillness is characterized by a lowering of external activity. You can slow the breath and do what's called pranic breathing or subtle breath. That's when you take in as little breath as you possibly can. And this will activate a more subtle way of drawing in the vital essence and will increase your sensitivity. If you then oscillate between more aggressive, maybe that's not the right term, but more open, deeper breathing to subtle breathing, you will find greater range between those polarities, and then you'll have a greater depth to your lovemaking experience. Okay, we're at about an hour. I think that's pretty good for an episode. So we discussed breathing, the importance of it mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. I gave kind of a windy tour of some of the information I have on athletics and breathing and how I work with my breathing system. And then we spoke about lovemaking, the range of breathing tactics and preparations and why we do them in the nervous system and how it's an effective tool for helping to offer our love, helping to evolve our nervous system, and do all the things that we love in this life. Thank you for listening. Aya Om.